Hello everyone
Mhm.
to the Quest Unlock show. Today we have a very special guest with us. Today I get to get an opportunity to speak with one of my childhood icons. Today we have with us Dave Gilbert, the founder of Wadjet Eye Studios and Wadjet Eye Games. He is essentially like it wouldn't be wrong to say like he's Miyazaki of point and click games, of adventure games.
Oh my gosh! Wow. Okay, that's a new one. Thank you. I'm glad that my video is not my camera's not working, as y'all can tell, because I probably look very embarrassed right now.
No, no, no. It's like some of the work you have
In a good way. In a good
created,
way.
some of the games you have created, those have been truly, transcendental. Like people often, I have always been a fan of pixelized games because I have realized over the course of when I started to understand video games and I looked at them more than as a means of enjoyment, that games with and very indulgent art style often stand the test of time. And some of your work that you have created and also co-produced, like Techno Babylon and Ben Chandler's work, it still stands true. I remember playing Gemini Roo on a smartphone couple of years back, and I still remember parts of it very clearly despite playing it on a 5-inch screen. So like I how do you go about making such beautiful pieces of art?
Well, just to be clear, Technobabylon and Gemini specifically, I didn't write.
Yes.
I published them. Technobabylon, like Wadjet Eye did the art for it, but I personally wasn't involved. So I just want to make that distinction clear. Um, but I guess for me, when I started, it was more. Um, I started making them just as a way to kind of creatively vent. 9/11 had just happened. I live in New York, and I was looking for, and I had just recently been laid off from a job, so I wasn't working, and I was trying to get my mind off stuff. And I had grown up playing a lot of these adventure games, so I was very familiar with the tropes and the language of these games. And I discovered a an engine, a tool called Adventure Game Studio, and which was kind of a best way to describe it is an RPG maker for point and click games.
Yes.
It took a lot of the grunt work out of making them, and I thought, oh, maybe I can make one of these, and I did. I made a little game in a weekend, um, and I always joke that it was a game where you play the Grim Reaper, which says a lot about my state of mind at the time. But I made it, and people seemed to like it, and it inspired me and encouraged me to make more. And then after about 4 5 years of doing them for fun, I decided, like, in the meantime, I had gotten another job. I didn't like it. I quit the job, taught English in South Korea for a year, came back home and had money saved up, and I couldn't envision getting like a real job again. And so I wrote a game for fun called the Shivah, and I decided when I finished making it that I didn't want to do anything else. Like, I really just liked making these games, and I wanted to see if I could make it work. So I sold it, and instead of releasing it for free, I sold it, and it wasn't like a runaway success or anything, but it paid some bills and it kept me going, and enough people liked it that I just kept making them. And then almost 20 years later, I'm still doing that. And eventually I got into publishing and just sort of kept the ball rolling that way.
Yes, I actually have played parts of Shiva, and the way it captures some of the like the Jewish culture. It's like you would, if you take a look at the screenshot out of the game, if somebody playing it, they wouldn't be able to tell that it has such deep undertones about the culture. And although the story on surface seems so simple, but despite its simple art form, it's compelling, like, and it stays with you,
Oh,
especially
thank
if
you.
you are from that community. So yeah, it like
No, it's interesting because I never really was terribly religious. I'm still not. I am Jewish, I grew up in New York, and it was a point of view that I was able um, to it was a point of view that I was able to create. Although I kind of do wish that like other Jewish themed games had been made between then and now, because it's been almost 20 years, and the Shivah is always being held up as like here's what Jewish games should be like, and I got a lot of things wrong. There's a lot of things about Jewish culture, and like especially like sort of the internal politics of how synagogues work, completely wrong. Like a lot of stuff, I'm like, like please don't use this game as a teaching tool on how to be Jewish. I got a lot of things wrong, but above all, I want to just tell like a cool noir story, and I just used like a rabbi as a way to kind of subvert like the typical detective expectations. Like
True.
I wanted a detective character that wasn't an actual detective, and I just came up with him for some reason.
Yes, and also like that's really interesting to hear from you that you got several details wrong, because although as you mentioned that it shouldn't be held up as a cornerstone to or to get insight into Jewish culture, but at the same time I believe it truly is a very good example of representation and what it can do to spark interest for people who belong to other communities or to people who belong to other backgrounds. Because as someone
Oh,
who is
thank you.
non-Jewish, it really intrigued me on like how the inner workings are of the community. And as you mentioned that the main protagonist, you wanted someone who isn't a detective, and I believe this is like a common running theme in your games, that your or by default, given the nature of point and click adventure games, you have to play the role of investigating and working your through the story. So having a religious backdrop, really,
Mhm.
like, that's an interesting choice for a first game. And world was,
Thank
I
you.
believe,
Yeah.
more accepting back then of such pieces of art. uh, People today tend to be more vocal about their opinions when they do not connect. People back then were more accepting, is what I feel.
I don't know. It wasn't that there was so much they were more accepting. Is that like, I mean, I think what gave the Shiva a bit of like attention was that no one had done that. No one had done a game with a rabbi as the main character. It's not that like people were, more comfortable with sharing it. No one was doing it. So it was easy for me to be comfortable because no one was doing it. There was no one to say, hey, maybe this is a bad idea. There was no one to say that because no one was doing it. And I really didn't think of it as like, oh, I'm being like doing this edgy thing. It was just, all right, here's just the story I want to tell. And also having been in South Korea for a year before that, where I was like very aware of being the only Jewish person around, to the point where like a lot of people I met had never met a Jew, didn't know anything about it. Like it was like this alien concept. And having grown up in and around New York all my life, that was a very new experience for me. I was always surrounded by other Jewish people, or at least they were around. And when I came back from that, I think it was just a way to kind of reconnect with that part of myself, even though being Jewish is not a huge part of my identity. I mean, I do we do Shabbat dinner and stuff like that, and the high holy days, but that's about it. So I don't really, I don't know where I'm going with this, but at the time, I just wanted to write a cool noir story because I've always really been into noir stories. So
Yes.
that was my primary focus.
And
I would do a lot of things differently, for sure.
I would actually love to play a sequel to Shiva someday, to see where the story goes next. If it's on your like to do list, please do make it. I request as a
Yeah,
fan.
well, there's like some of our games, like people want to know if there's going to be a sequel, but I think for some stories, like it comes to a natural
End.
ending, and for that character, I don't know where else I would take him because he reached the end of like a character arc. Like he pretty much said everything that needed to be said, and I don't know what more I would do with him. Like solve another mystery. I don't know, but a lot of that story. And keep in mind, I wrote the Shiva in about a month. It was a very quick, short project. It originally was for a jam game, and then I decided to sell it. And I didn't change much. I just improved some of the graphics and got the voice acting in and changed the music. And I'm like, here, that'll give me $5 for this. So I didn't change a lot, and I wrote it very quickly. So I didn't really have time to really think deeply about it. But it is a very self-contained story. And some of our other games, people were like, "Oh, I would love a sequel to Primordia." Like, I don't know, I didn't write Primordia, so I don't want to put words in the developers' mouths. But like, I don't know where else you would take those characters. Like, pretty much every everything that needed to be said was said. And like sometimes it just you need to have the courage to end things. Like I ended Blackwell, and that kind of stuff. Old Skies very much has an ending. Although it's time travel, I could revert it if I want to, but I'm not gonna. So yeah, I think sometimes adding more just because there's a demand for it.
Doesn't really
Um,
do it justice. I agree.
yeah, it kind of like what's the word? It makes the whole thing a little bit
Redundant.
lesser.
Yes.
It just yeah.
I agree. I agree because even I now that you say it, uh, since I have been able to complete Old Skies, as the ending that you mentioned, although there is definitely scope for more stories to be told in that universe, but the main character story, Fia's story, I believe the way it
Yeah.
has been, uh, the entire arc of her character, I believe it ends in a very perfect place, and it would be,
Mm.
uh, I think, incorrect to meddle with it anymore. And Sally has done a beautiful
Cheapen
job
it. That was the
voicing.
word. That was the word I was looking for. It would cheapen it. It would make it not as valuable or as good. If I like brought Fia back or brought Rosa Blackwell back or someone, it would cheapen the whole thing. I think
Correct.
so. I resist doing that.
That's really beautiful to hear. And that brings me to the next question. You mentioned about New York being a backdrop in colorful stories, and even in Old Skies, uh, like the backdrops that you have in each timeline that you go in, the locations or the time zones play a pivotal role. So when you decide to write a story for a game, uh, do you first select the city and then base your characters around it, or is it the other way around? Because
Well, they
your
all take
cities
place in New
have,
York.
you create really beautiful lived in environments despite the simplistic art. I mean, the art looks
Well, thank you.
simplistic, but it's so beautiful. I mean, Ben's work is truly amazing.
Oh, it is. Keep in mind that all the games that I've personally written all take place in New York. Because
Yes.
up until recently, I was a New Yorker, and we moved away last summer. But up until that point, like I had lived in and around New York my entire life, almost my whole life. I went to college. I went to university in Boston, but other than that, I lived either on Long Island, I lived in Manhattan, or I lived in Brooklyn. And so I am a New Yorker. That's not an identity I'm willing to let go of yet. And setting my games there creates a little bit of a shorthand. Often, like world building is a skill, and there's a lot of effort that needs to go into world building. And with a lot of my games, it's always the real world plus something extra. Like Blackwell is like the real world plus ghosts. Old Skies is the real world plus time travel. And by grounding it in a city that pretty much everybody knows, um, this is just a happy accident, I realized later. But by setting it in a city like New York that everyone knows just through popular culture, everyone's seen a movie that takes place in New York, a television show or whatever. Everyone has seen New York in some way or form, and so it feels familiar already. And the fact that I am very intimately familiar with the city and I love the city, I create a connection to my work that can't be faked. It's a sincerity that can't be faked, and so I'm able to kind of by creating that connection between me and the game, I'm able to make the connection between the game and the audience. And I think that was always kind of a happy accident, not something I ever did on purpose, but I think it certainly helped.
No, the connection is definitely felt, and even in Old Skies. Now, this might be a bit of spoiler for folks who haven't played it. Uh, all the time zones that you navigate through as Fia and then as other characters, it's like you. after a while, especially like once you are familiar with the mechanics, you feel intimately connected to the places. I mean, not just because of you have done some really impeccable uh, art for the characters, like the costumes that you gave them, the dialogues and everything. It's just that every detail in the art, in the backdrop, or even in the foreground, it's telling a story, is what I felt. Like there are common elements between each scene, as well as there are certain elements that are present in each timeline that lend it an authenticity that's really difficult to replicate. As you mentioned that your experience as a New Yorker uh, lent you this happy accident. It's definitely felt in your work.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and it also helps that I can, I can use pull locations from my real life. It's no coincidence that a lot of the early Blackwell games, all the locations that you visit, were like within 5 minute walk from my apartment. 'Cause you had like Washington Square, you had the Minetta Tavern, you had Grace Church, and you had like all these places that I used to just go to all the time. And so I could imbue, so I had like, oh, let's have the characters go there, and I could sort of imbue the scene, or somehow, even though I didn't do the art, I was able to kind of, I don't know, it was special to me, and just knowing that it created some kind of intangible thing. I can't quite explain what it was. That and making that emotional connection is something I always try to do in everything I
True,
make.
true, true. The way you describe it, it almost feels like the way when you were, giving uh, the description to the artist to create that backdrop, you were sort of uh, immortalizing whatever scene you had. Like, for example, if the timeline that you showed in Blackwell, it was from your adolescence or your early years, you practically just
Yeah.
immortalized it in that time zone and through
In
that
some way,
setting.
it's more true than you realize, because some of those places are now gone.
True.
Like in Blackwell Convergence, it was the Minetta Tavern. I mean, it's not gone, but it's like it's been completely
Transformed.
renovated, and now it's this high end. Very, you need a month long reservation to get in there. Some places are just gone or completely changed. So it definitely did like created a snapshot of that moment in time,
True,
which
true, true.
I'm quite proud of.
I agree with it. And now I will be revisiting Blackwell with this new insight, and I will definitely take a different look at the game now.
Uh,
And thank you so much for sharing that. It brings me
Yeah, the
to
dog walking park in Blackwell Legacy, that's totally different now. They moved it to a different area of the park,
oh,
so
nice.
that's completely different now. So
That's interesting. I will be definitely replaying the games now again. I own all three. I actually had played them back then out of order, not in the order they were supposed to be played, but now I'll be doing a replay through in the intended order, in the chronological order.
oh, really? That's
Yeah.
and it still made sense.
It initially didn't, but then so once I completed all three games, I went back to I looked up some wikis, read some watched some videos, and then I realized, okay, this is some really deep writing, and like I love
Oh,
all the
thank you.
characters. That's when I actually I discovered Old Skies, I believe, somewhere towards the beginning of 2024, when I started actively using Twitter, and I came across your account and you were posting all these dev diaries. And so from what I realized, I was actually going through the older posts of yours and some of the older interviews you gave. I believe there is quite a significant shift in the setting of the story of Old Skies. Initially, I believe it was like the core premise was slightly different, if I'm not wrong.
Oh yeah, everything about it was different. It was a lot more epic, and that sounds. I'm making that sound like a bad thing, and it kind of was, because I'm not good at epic. I'm not good at like big epic world spanning stories, and it was too much for me to handle. And so I had written like the original story was that Fia would she was tourist time travel tourist agent. She goes back in time, with this guy, Joe Anderson's. He wants to go to a restaurant. Complications happen. The mission's over. She comes back, and like everything is gone. Like the world is basically a black void outside of their office. Nothing else is there. And so she's like, "Well, what the heck happened?" and so she has her time travel equipment, so she can kind of like go back into a few different eras to try to like track down and stop whatever happened from happening. And it was an interesting idea. It was an interesting hook, but when it came down to actually designing and implementing it, it was too much. It was too big. You know, I couldn't fit all of that in my head. And when I sat down to actually write the thing, I managed to write the bit, you know, where you take a tourist into the past. And that was the bit I was like actually able to write. So I thought, well, why don't I just make that the game? And I kind of liked that idea because it told more personal stories. It gave it a bit more focus. It took something like each story started from a very simple idea that I
True.
could then extrapolate on. Like, person wants to go into the past for some, you know, maybe like trivial or you know, basic reason. They don't want to do anything drastic like change history or kill Hitler or whatever.
True.
They just want to do something small and personal. And then complications happen, and then it could kind of like the complexity, it could get complicated, but it always started from that very simple idea, and that gave me the focus I needed to make the game that you ended up playing.
That's actually fascinating. And now that you mention it, the final version of the game that I got to play, in which Fia is a member of the Chronozen agency, and then she takes along people to complete their request. And so I'm a big fan of time travel media in general, and although there are some basic rules that are also like those can be also seen in old skies. And one thing I really loved about how you had structured the whole game and built up its world was uh, there was really next to no time spent in actually explaining uh, the impact of time travel. And yet the world
Mm-hmm.
that you had created, it was so dystopian. Like the very first time I saw chrono shift happening, I was like, how do these guys manage? And then there is dialogue after each mission in which Fia and Nozo interact, and they tell that how they do not, get attached to anything. There is whole angle with the Duffy, and I was like, okay,
Yeah.
this is literally the best example of a dystopian time travel, friendly world in a way, in which it has become so easy, almost like going outside to buy groceries without realizing the implications of doing something so world altering. So how were you able to
Yeah, I
actually
mean,
do it? I mean, it
well,
that
I
is
kind of wanted to. Sorry, go on, finish up.
yeah, sorry. Like you mentioned that you struggled with building epic, themes. I understand that
Yeah.
the each story or each sub story in the game is very intimate in its nature, along with the grander arc. But the premise around time travel and the lore that you have built, the whole dynamics and the mechanics of it, that's extremely grand in my opinion, because the implications that we see throughout the game. How were you able to do that? Like managing the intimacy with the grandness.
Interesting question. Okay. Well, I kind of I wanted to loosen up the typical rules about time travel because originally when I started writing it, it was like everything that Fia did. You know, she would pick up an object and she'd be like, "Is this okay? Did I break time? Did anything major change by me picking this up?" And he'd be like, "No, you're fine." And that just got really annoying after a while, and like everything like that just it was an obstacle to having fun. Like I couldn't just go around and do things because you're constantly checking, oh, is this safe, is this safe, and that got boring. So then I decided, okay, well, what if like it was okay, what if time paradoxes were totally okay and just a regular, regular part of their lives, and that where you could really go back in time and do anything you wanted within reason. You couldn't like do anything that would have anything that could be semi predictable and controlled is fine, because like, well, the technology exists, people are going to use it, at least this way it's semi regulated. People could still use it for what they wanted, but within reason, it's controlled. And so, and that in order to tell any kind of time travel story, I think you need to have some restrictions, because the possibilities are so endless. You go back and do anything. You have any kind of problem or puzzle. It's like, well, why don't you just go back in time and change it? You need to have some restrictions. And I think The best time travel stories are the ones who either A, they have some very strict rules like that, or two, like narratively, they have restrictions. I always use the example of Back to the Future. I think Back to the Future, the rules, there aren't really any hard, fast rules about time travel. There's some things, like have like, oh, photos disappear, stuff like that. But there must have been some mandate, either by the writer or by the producer or someone, to say the stakes of Back to the Future never expand beyond Hill Valley.
True.
Like they never leave the town, and the stakes rarely expand beyond like Marty's family or Doc's family. Like it never, if they screw up, it's just their lives that get messed up. It's not like world altering stakes. It's very personal.
True.
So it kept the scope very small, and they were able to build around that. I've recently read The Time Traveler's Wife, which is one of those very, very strict rules things. And so you go through it, it's almost like a puzzle. Like, all right, how did they get around this? Or how did this happen? Because the rules are immutable, you can't change them. And I found that very interesting. And then you have something like Legends of Tomorrow or Bill and Ted, which are more comedies, and that there are like sort of rules, but not really. It's like you're just there to enjoy yourself and have fun, and that is kind of more what I was leaning toward. I wanted to have fun with it. While at the same time, like I kind of wanted to split the difference between the two. I wanted to have fun, but I wanted you to take it seriously. And so I make this rule. Okay, like paradoxes, they're not that dangerous. They just happen. People aren't aware of them, but you are. And then I took that a step farther as I started writing it, and I thought, well, okay, what does this kind of life do to a person? It would make you very like misanthropic and nihilistic, where literally nothing matters. And you can't get attached to anything because it could disappear. And I was really glad to hear you say that it landed for you, because my worry was that at the beginning of the game, Fia is very deliberately very disaffected. She had, and I worked with Sally, the voice actress, a lot on how to do that. Like her home is like devoid of any like real decorations. She's kind of a little distant, very much on purpose, because that's the way she lives. And what I was aiming to do was take her from that, and her arc is to turn her into someone who gives a damn about something at the end. And so, and that could be applied not just to a time traveler, but to like life. Like
True.
what does it mean to if you think that nothing matters to you, if you go through life thinking nothing matters, what does that do to you, and what can change that? And that was an interesting thing to play with.
True, true. And I must say, Sally, if like you get a chance to speak with her again, do compliment her. Like she has done an extremely fabulous job, and I forgot the name of the person who voiced Nozo. Like I am a fan of
Edwin
guy,
Sun.
yeah, Edwin. Like I'm a fan of guy in chair characters, but in recent times, the way Nozo's character has been written, and like every time you hit the button to call up Nozo, and Fiat just says his name, and he comes up, you sense a connection between them that is like it is
So
platonic.
good.
It's like it's one of the best dynamics I've played in recent times, and it
Oh
is so
wow, thank you.
effortless. Yeah, thank. It's
That means the
really
world. Thank
effortless.
you.
It's really fantabulous writing, and especially like this is spoiler. I'll be putting up a tag here. So in the end, when Nozo goes to look for Fia, and then there is whole conversation in the end with Imani. I was like, that's the definition of a friend. Like both of them are nihilist, and when you there is this conversation in the middle half of the game when Nozo tells about his family and how they got chrono shifted, and how he tried to look them up and then eventually gave up to understand that nothing mattered in the end. Yet even his arc goes that he tries to look out for Fia, and then he knows the truth.
Mhm.
So that's incredible. Like performances from Edwin and Sally really help to nailed that change in the character arc. It was beautiful,
I'm sure
especially.
they're both going to listen to this, so but I'll be sure to tell them. I'll be sure to tell them both.
I will definitely be tagging them as well as sharing this video with you. Please do
Mm.
share it with them. I really want to
I'm so
compliment
glad.
them. And
I adore
I
them both. Yeah.
yes, I actually would love if, so I'm not sure if you have you ever played the Dark Side Detective games? Those are also point and
Yeah, yeah,
click.
yeah, yeah.
Those are also my, like, one of my favorite franchises. So if ever you decide to revisit old skies and just drop in a special episode or a special segment, please do something with Nozo. I really want to I really want to get more of that guy. He's like, there is this stoicness that he has brought to the character, and every time that ERP kicks in, the first time it kicks in, then every subsequent time it kicks in, and they both have this banter between them. I really loved that. Also, how did you like, I realized during the game design phase, I'm still yet to play with the your commentary on like each level. uh, v- there was definitely a frustration that came in the first few times when the ERP section comes up in the first time during the prohibition era. But then, as I realized that you had actually put in dialogue that acknowledges this frustration on Fia's part as well, and how Nozo acknowledges. How did you come across it? Like, was the same some inputs from Sally, or how was that part written?
You know how I came up with the idea of the ERP?
Yes.
Well, I mean, it's mainly because there's a kind of known sin for adventure games where you don't kill the player. It's like you don't die in adventure games, and that's like, a kind of a sin to kill off the player. And I've had death in games before, like an unavowed, like you can die, but it's just like a flash of white and it resets itself, and it's like, oh, it never happened. But there was this one section of the game. It was the Prohibition era section where because I did this even though the Prohibition era comes third, I designed it second,
Oh.
and you can kind of tell in places. But I designed the jewelry heist, the jewelry store heist, and and I thought, well, how, like the original history, these characters die during the jewelry. I'm trying to avoid mega spoilers. These aren't really spoilers. These characters die during a jewelry store robbery, and you need to save them by helping them with the robbery and helping them get away. So there needed to be an element of peril, right? Otherwise, it has no teeth. There's no stakes. So there needed to be, you needed to be able to die. And I'm like, well, how does that work? Do you just like restart? You just reload, or it just resets itself? And I just thought that was just very unsatisfying for some reason. But I kept thinking, well, I always firmly believe that if you have a gimmick in a game or a special setting, like, you need to use it. And so since it's a game about time travel, you need to use time travel wherever possible. So I'm like, well, maybe in the event of an agent's death, they get rewound. And she has the memories of everything that transpired. And so that way she can literally try again. And you, the player, will literally try again. And that actually, I like that idea, and I tested it out with that jewelry store heist, and it worked really well. I found it a lot of fun, and especially, like, it sort of added to this nihilistic attitude of Fia's, where even dying doesn't matter. And so her kind of eye rolly reactions to dying again just never stopped being funny. And it led to some very dark humor in places where they
True.
just talk about dying all the time. And especially getting, I think what made Fia, or not Fia funny, but Sally's version of Fia funny, was that I went through several iterations of how to handle this character, and I think making her, originally I didn't want her to be, I wanted her to be competent at the job, right? I wanted her to be competent. I don't like playing like a goofball. I don't like creating a character who's a goofball. I wanted her to be competent at the job, but that was a little boring because she just knew exactly what to do at every point. And so what I decided to do instead was, like, have, when things go wrong, she has this very professional attitude, but when things go wrong, that breaks down, and that kind of makes it funny. Like she's the straight woman reacting to like insane things happening around her, and it made her so much more funny. And Sally will be the first to say, like, when I was directing her, she would always ask after a reading, she's like, "Was that too funny? Was that should I be less funny?" Because she was well aware of that. She was well aware that like it was her reactions to things that made it funny, not her being funny. And so yeah, I worked with Sally a lot in how to do that. I just like the playing it the straighter the better in most cases.
Yes, yes, her actually dialogue delivery helped a lot in, as you mentioned, and even I, as you were talking, I realized that that the nihilistic nature of the whole, all the agents working in the agency, it comes really to the forefront when you realize how many times must have they engaged in ERP for essentially missions that meant nothing to them but probably meant the world to somebody. So
Yeah.
that adds a lot of character depth, and Sally delivered with some of the deliveries, like when she scolds Nozo that her brain is stinging with that after effect of const- constantly getting revived. It's really funny, and you can't help but and the high section that you mentioned, that was honestly one of the only sections where I got stuck, and I was like, I was trying to figure out the combination, and I did everything possible. I wrote down on notebook, and I did eventually what I did was I just wrote the whole problem down and asked chat gpt and it gave me
Oh
uh,
no.
it gave me a dozen or so combinations, and none of them were working, and I was scratching my head. I asked my wife, and she also gave me some suggestions. None of them were working. And then out of the blue, I was constantly like calling up Nozo that I had a feeling that whatever he's saying, there is something, you must have put some clue in there. I also used the developer commentary to see if something is there. And then when the actual solution cracked in, I loudly shouted and my wife got startled, and within a moment I was able to clear that, and then the whole story progressed, and I was like, wow, that was
Oh wow. I don't, was
good.
you the one who Emily told me that someone got stuck there? Was that you?
No, no. I was actually I was about to reach out to you on Discord, but I thought let me just try a couple of more times. And at the very last attempt, I was able to get through. So I was like, thank goodness.
That's okay. Yeah, I always say there's never a puzzle that's maybe it's not the simplest puzzle, but there's never a puzzle so simple that there's someone who won't get stuck.
True.
And I'm always impressed where I think something is super obvious, like there's a locked door and there's a glowing key right over there. Like someone will get stuck. They just will. Someone just won't see it or something. And I probably could have been a little bit more clear with the Nazo hints there, but oh well.
No, but I even I thought
I
of
did get yeah.
telling you this, but I feel it should remain unchanged because when you actually figure it out, there is this satisfaction that comes in that okay, you did it. That would
Oh
be
yeah. Well,
dampened.
that's the juice, isn't it? That's the juice. That's what
True.
gets people really. It's like the secret is to get them stuck just short enough that they
I
get
agree.
that satisfaction of figuring it out before they get frustrated and quit. That's the balancing it.
True, 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 and it's really well done. And also, I
No, thank you.
one thing I would also like to commend is the music in each of the eras that plays through. Like it's some of the really good music. Like last good music that I heard in this year was Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. It has some really good orchestral themes, and I mean, Old Skies is coming in such a packed month, and despite that, it stands out on the merit of its storytelling and the characters you have written. And
Coming out in a bad month. What do you mean?
bad as in a packed month, like we have Claire
Oh, a
Webster.
packed month.
Yeah,
Okay, I see what you mean. Okay.
yeah. I mean, it has, and especially now we recently had Rosewater, which has received some really fabulous reviews, and I am yet to play it, but like that's something that I also believe that maybe if things work out, if ever the worlds of Rosewater and Old Skies merge, it would be a fan's dream come true.
Well, I used to work with Francisco,
Oh,
but I guess Fia could theoretically. Well, she did go back in time to that time period, but she
yeah,
was in a city, not in the West. So maybe
yeah.
they could have met. Who knows?
I imagine they did. It's a really good time zone, and I would like to talk about Nighthawks, your next project
Oh, sure, sure, sure.
that you're publishing, I believe. So
Hmm.
it's again a noir project, but a vampire noir this time.
Yeah,
So
it's kind of a visual novelish kind of thing. It's the gameplay of like Fallen London, like sunless sea, sunless skies, Fallen London, that kind of thing. The guy who's writing it, his name is Richard Cobbett. He worked for Fail Better, so he's very familiar with that type of game, and he's been working on it for a long time. And it's getting close. He's We're in the middle of testing it right now, and so he's dealing with all that. He's dealing with all the testers, and it's coming along great. So yeah, it's I'm not much involved with it from like a side, but I mean Wadjet Eye is involved with it, like the company. Ben has done all the art for it, and we did all the voice acting already and that kind of stuff. But I am not that involved personally, but I'll answer what I can.
So, yeah, I understand. So actually, there's a funny story. When I discovered Nighthawks, it was through a casting call on Twitter, and
Oh no way.
and I saw your name attached to it, and I thought I wanted to give this a shot. And I've never done any form of voice, like narration or any sort of voice artist work. So I did some lines. I tried to record, and then I went back to the post to see where I can submit it, and then I realized that the deadline had passed. So that's how I actually remembered Nighthawks, and then I saw the setup. There were for the casting call purposes, there were character sheets given, and some of the backdrops that were mentioned, character histories that were mentioned. It's shaping up to be really interesting. Like from what I understood, it's like Vampire the Masquerade meets something like say LA Noir, wherein you have these dingy cities in, I believe, as you mentioned, London, wherein your character
Mm-hmm.
is still a detective who is trying to navigate the supernatural world.
Not quite. I mean, it's not a. You're not a detective. You're a fledgling vampire. And like, what makes it different than most vampire fiction? Because like I think he wanted to make it different from Vampire the Masquerade, and so the first thing he thought of was, well, what if there was no masquerade? Like
Uh,
the secret is out. Like vampire people, like the world knows about vampires exist. That like committed any kind of crime could come to this city and live. Um, and be given amnesty. So if you're like a new vampire, like just you're fledgling vampire, you just got turned, you're living in this city, and it's sort of like your rise through the ranks. You work at a nightclub and then called Nighthawks, and then you end up taking over the nightclub and you start meeting all these factions and everything, and it's a really amazing story with tons of like there's a lot of companion characters. It's got that kind of BioWare-ish narrative structure where you can bring characters with you on missions and quests and things like that, and there's so much to it. There's a lot of branching. There's a lot of really just a lot of dark humor. Richard's writing is just fantastic, and it's so complex, which is why it's taken him so long to make it, because it just the branches just are insane. But he's getting there. It's coming together nicely now. He was also sick for a while. Fortunately, that's sorted out, and he's back on track now. So we're hoping next year, probably next year.
that's really fantastic description. I would like to play it, like it's already on my radar, but the way you described it, and especially the BioWare influences, like that's the sort of point and click adventure games that are I'm a big fan of R.L. Stein's Choose Your Adventure books. So to be able to play them in video games, it's like that's the best form of interactive fiction you can a person like me can interact with. So I'm really looking forward to playing that.
Me too.
So
I wish I could explain more, but it's like I'm not the writer. That Richard, you'd have to speak to Richard more about it as well.
I do plan to hopefully next year when it comes around. I'm still doing this
Mm.
work, and I would love to interview him as well because the little glimpses that I saw on social media, that's definitely like Vampire Masquerade is one of my favorite franchises. And apart
Mm.
from the usual vampire stories that are coming out, this story, as you described it, there are definitely political undertones to it and clear real world
Especially
parallels
now, yeah.
to. So that's something that always intrigues me. And even in Old Skies, the world that you have created, especially, I mean, it's not a dystopia. You have not outrightly called it as a world that one would desire to live in. There are facets of it that one would expect to enjoy, like the ease with which you can time travel and do things, but then you realize as the story progresses that it is still restricted to a certain section of society that can afford it. And with it
Yeah.
also brings into question the ethical part of it, that when they are, say, making changes to a timeline, what about the people who are inadvertently being chrono shifted? What about those lives? What about their timeline rankings and this whole of the dynamics? Like, there is so much subtle storytelling there that can be like explored, and it's a really beautiful world.
Mm. Thank you, thank you. Like I was again, I kind of like I have all these rules about like how to organize like a game world, and a lot of Old Skies was me tossing them out the window because their world changes so much. I didn't really go into detail about what that future society is like because what's the point? It's constantly changing,
Correct.
and so again, like I'm always thinking like I'm breaking all of my rules. Like but I felt like keeping again. I kept the focus on them and Chronos and I guess like when I first started writing it, like I started with the individual stories, right? The individual missions, and that's where I put all my most of my effort and most of my focus because if those weren't good, if those weren't enjoyable, it wouldn't matter like how well developed like the rest of the world building was, like the future world, the how Chronozen works. None of that would matter if the individual missions weren't fun. And
True.
so that's where I put most of my effort. And there is a story arc, as we've talked about before. There is kind of a glue that holds it all together, which is it's not like it's not super solid. It is there. I was very proud about how I managed to tie each mission to like to roughly what Theo was going through at that particular moment. Like that worked out pretty well.
Yes.
Sometimes things just work out, but my main priority when designing the game was to make sure each of the individual missions were interesting because that was the juice. That's why you play.
True, true, and it has really come together in a beautiful way. And as you mentioned, I actually felt that this game is very different in the way you have told its story compared to your previous works. Uh, there you like there was definitely feeling that you were playing it more loosely with the narrative threads. You were being more, how should I say, uh, playing it dangerously, but it came
Mhm.
across really well. It has landed
How so?
its landing, so kudos on that.
I'm curious how you mean like I played it dangerously.
So, like for example, with the chrono shift thing, when it first happens, even the player would think that, okay, whatever am I doing, does it really matter? And then the way each mission, like each submission story, and then the grander narrative that comes through of Fia's arc, you realize that although nothing may matter, but for you, like the person who is involved in that particular arc, it may mean the world. So it doesn't
Exactly.
necessarily
Yeah.
have to mean everything to everybody, it just has to be important to you. So that whole message comes through really well. And
Thank you. I mean, there's a lot of ways to look at it. I know for me, a lot of it was about like legacy because you can't see how old I am, but I'm pushing 50, and you always get to a point where you think like, oh, like what am I leaving behind? And for a lot of these clients in Old Skies, that their main concern is like either well, what am I leaving behind? Like what can I change? Like what is my legacy? Can I change it? And then is it actually important that you have one? Like what if you have no legacy? Is that okay? It was fun to play around with that theme. Even though I can't say I came to any like hard hitting conclusions, or maybe I did. You know, if you played it and got a message from it, that's cool. But for me, it was just like playing with that idea through adventure games and the genre of time travel. Like that was kind of fun to play with because
Yes,
it's something I think about. A lot of people think when you get to this age, you think about that stuff.
it's like one of the best time travel stories I've recently experienced. If I had to ask you, which
Ew.
is the you're most welcome. If I had to ask you, which is the most character, like which is the character which is the closest to you in Old Skies, as you mentioned that almost all of the clients are pushing 50s. Uh, so which one do you is closest to you in real life from all the ones that you have
Okay.
told us?
I mean, I think a lot of them are parts of me in different ways. I mean, the character of Joe in the very first mission, he was also in the demo that I released about
Yes.
3 years ago. Like, like I always joke, like there's living in Manhattan and living in major cities. There's like, I have a big thing about restaurants. Like when a restaurant I love closes, it destroys me. And I always think, well, if I had a time machine, I'd go like to Boston, 1995, go on Noodle Shop on Com Ave. That's where I'm going. And so it just was sort of like that's what Joseph Anderson in the first mission wants to do. He wants to go to like his favorite restaurant that he went to as a student and to kind of relive those glory days. Not glory days, but just kind of relive that.
The best
And so
ones.
I definitely infused a lot of my feelings about that into him. I mean, all of them. Like, I also, I guess, Hannah in chapter 5, where it's just we all have something we want to change, and maybe not Hannah specifically, but that mission specifically was probably the most personal, and you could probably tell because it takes place around 9/11, and so I mean I was there around 9/11. I saw the towers on fire and everything, so it's like I remember that time really well. I avoided the day itself because I had no interest in like reliving that or trivializing it, but I did like that I was able to show just before and then like a month or two after because I remember that feeling really well, and so that was like extremely personal to me. But I don't know, they're all different parts of like Chloe. There's always that sense of like, okay, I've achieved the thing I really wanted to achieve. What now? And I think a lot of when I released Unavowed 7 years ago, there was this sense like that it had exceeded all my reputation, my expectations, and then some. Like it sold exceptionally well, like beyond it was such an outlier that I really had to let go of a lot of expectations about whatever I did next. Like it probably won't do as well as Unavowed. People might not like it as well as Unavowed. Unavowed was like lightning in a bottle. I don't know. Everything came together just perfectly. And so I was like, do I just retire? Do I just like go out on a high note, or do I keep going? And like, what next? And that a lot of that was Chloe for me. So I infuse a bit of myself in every character because I feel like that's how you give them life. And I think I always try to find, like I said, I always try to find that point of connection.
That's beautiful to hear, and yeah, like those. That is one of the reasons these characters feel so alive, and so like they feel like persons you could actually, uh, you know, talk to or you wish to talk to. And now that you mention,
Oh,
I am really glad that you chose not to give up after Runabout. Like it's as you mentioned correctly, it's a lightning in a bottle game, and I feel Old Skies is also one of those games that although it exists in a different form of fiction like science fiction compared to the dark fantasy nature of Runabout, this is going to be, I believe, one of the seminal adventure games, and this would, in my opinion, gain a cult following over the years, even if it probably doesn't get the attention it does in the month, because 2025 is such a packed year. But this
it
is
is. Yeah.
definitely it's definitely going to be held in high regard.
Well,
It's
thank you. I'm hoping so. I put a lot of myself into it, but it feels like the game it felt like the right game to make at this stage in my life and career. It just, I don't know. It was just, it's hard to explain. Like, it just, wherever ideas come from, they just get filtered through my own life experience, and that's what, and this is the result, and I'm quite happy with it.
Thank you for creating the game. It means a lot. And
Well, thank you for saying that. That means a lot.
thank you. And with that, I would like to ask one final question. What, like, is there a new project that you're working on, and like, is it too early, or you are just going to
I
relax
gotta
for a
do
while?
another one. I gotta do this again. I have a few ideas. Well, me, not me personally, but in terms of what Wadjet Eye is doing, you mentioned Ben Chandler. He is the our main artist. He's done at least the games I've personally worked on. He's done all of the art for all of them, pretty much for the last like, gosh, 11, 12 years since 2013. Um, and he has asked me. He asked me if he could. He wanted to design his own game. He wanted to do his own game, and I said okay. He's more than earned that. So he's designed a very interesting world and mechanics, and he's experimenting right now. He's putting things together. He used to write his own games like back before he worked with me, and now he wants to get back into that. I know at the very least, because it's Ben, it's going to look spectacular
True.
because it's
I agree.
Ben. But like, and he has some very interesting ideas. So I'm really looking forward to see how he evolves them and incorporates them into a game. I'll be there to help him with that as well. But it's kind of nice because I have a feeling I'm going to crash hard after this game releases and after Old Skies releases, and it'll be nice to like take a break and kind of let a game kind of not magically happen, but it'll happen kind of like without my involvement. Like the company, like paying for it, paying for Ben to work and all that. So it's not like I'm doing nothing, but it'll be nice to like regroup, re-energize, get my mojo back, and then work on designing something new while he's making this. And then ideally, once he's done, I'll have a new design ready to go. So that's the ideal situation. But so that's what Wadjet Eye is working on. But what I personally am working on after Old Skies, I have a few ideas, but ideas are cheap. We'll see what I end up actually making.
Good to know that. I really hope to play Ben's game, Nighthawks, and whatever you make next. And I hope you keep making games. You had mentioned in one of the interviews that like you might retire and then come back if you get another worthwhile idea. I do hope to keep playing your games.
I think you mentioned Miyazaki earlier. I think someone made that reference to me, and I said, yeah, if I to be a real Miyazaki, I'd have to retire and then like do
Yes.
more, like keep coming back, like every 5 years or so. Oh, I got another idea. Make something else, and then yeah, like that.
But you are leaving like you have created an unreplaceable legacy in the form of Wadjet Eye Games and the
My
stories that
gosh,
you
thank
have
you.
shared. So kudos for that, and I
That
really
means
hope
the
to.
world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dave, for agreeing to this interview, and thank you for allowing such a young outlet like mine. And that, thank you. Have a good day and enjoy the conference and take a vacation. You have wholeheartedly deserved it.
That is my plan. All right.
And
Okay, so
best,
yeah, definitely let me know. Let me know when it goes out.
yes, and best of luck on the launch. It will do well. My well wishes are with you.
Knock on wood. Alrighty, thank you, Avi. And any follow up questions, let me know.
Yeah, definitely.